She signed the contract with shaking hands. Marry a billionaire, carry his heir, save her brother's life. There would be no love, no kisses, no promises, just business. But what happens when a woman driven by sacrifice meets a man who forgot how to feel, and when 4 tiny heartbeats change everything? From betrayal to redemption, from strangers to soulmates. This isn't just a story about an arrangement. It's about a woman who found strength in surrender, and a man who learned to love through the eyes of his children. If stories of second chances stir your soul, if you believe love isn't always perfect, but it's always worth it, then don't just scroll by. Subscribe to Love in Twilights. Share your thoughts in the comments. Was it the birth? The vows? The moment he broke down? And hit that like button if this story made you believe again. Because here, we bring you the best stories in the world. Now let's begin. The November rain had a way of making everything feel heavier, more final. Ruby Morgan stood at the edge of the hospital rooftop, not because she was giving up, but because it was the only place where the chaos quieted. Below her, the sirens came and went like tides, the city never pausing for a single soul. But in Ruby's world, time had stopped. Marcus, her little brother, her only family left, was dying. She had just come from his room on the cardiology floor, where the monitors hummed like an ominous lullaby. The doctor's words echoed in her ears like a cruel refrain. His heart is failing. The window is closing. If we're to proceed with the experimental treatment, it has to be now. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a lifeline. A $2.4 million lifeline she didn't have. Ruby's hands were raw from clutching her sketchpad tighter than necessary, her nails chipped from days of anxiety. She had tried everything. Crowdfunding, art commissions, freelance galleries, even auctioning a piece she'd sworn she'd never sell, the final portrait of their parents, painted from memory. But it wasn't enough. The world didn't trade sentiment for surgery. Down in the hospital lobby, she passed the donation box again, the one with Marcus's face on the front, eyes wide with youthful hope. No one dropped anything in. Not today. Maybe not ever again. She had exhausted every channel, every friend, every buyer, every whispered prayer. She'd begged insurance companies, pleaded with grants, even written to charities with heart-shaped logos who never replied. Now, as she returned to her studio apartment, Ruby slumped against the door, letting her bag slide to the floor. Her coat was soaked. The lights flickered above the kitchen sink. Cold silence greeted her. No music, no Marcus asking what was for dinner, no colors dancing across the canvas. Just silence. Until the envelope. It sat on the floor beneath the mail slot like a stray shadow. Heavy, cream-colored parchment, wax-sealed with an insignia she didn't recognize. Not junk mail, not hospital bills. She knelt slowly, her fingers trembling as she tore it open. Inside was a letter, short, clinical, and laced with veiled promise. You have been selected for a confidential meeting regarding a unique opportunity that may resolve your financial burdens permanently. Your profile has been vetted, and your discretion is assumed. Location, 45th floor, Russo International, Manhattan. Time, 11 a.m., Friday. No contact name, no explanation, just a silver monogram at the bottom, R.I. Russo International. Ruby scoffed. Everyone in New York knew that name. Russo International was one of the largest privately owned investment conglomerates on the East Coast, synonymous with cold mergers and colder headlines. She had seen the stories, employees vanishing from the upper ranks, subsidiaries swallowed whole, family scandals buried beneath silence and steel, the kind of company that didn't deal with people like her. Why would they be reaching out now, and why her? She flipped the envelope over, half expecting to find some hidden clause, some joke, but it was blank. Still, her instincts flared. This wasn't a scam. It was too polished, too personal, and somehow they knew about her debt, her situation. By midnight, Ruby sat in front of her laptop, a letter beside her coffee mug. She typed Russo International into the search bar and began scrolling. Headlines spilled like dominoes, corporate acquisitions, offshore accounts, political rumors. But most entries shared one common thread: Dominic Russo, a recluse billionaire. No public appearances in years, no interviews. A single photograph from 4 years ago showed a tall man in an all-black suit, eyes hidden behind sunglasses, flanked by 2 assistants. His reputation was unshakable, brilliant, ruthless, always 5 steps ahead. Ruby shut the laptop and stared at the ceiling. What kind of plan involved her? By morning, the envelope still lay on the table, untouched, yet radiating gravity. She made herself tea, ignored it, walked past her easel, didn't paint, sat by the window, watched the street. People moved as if the world hadn't tilted. But hers had. At 9:12 a.m., she opened her wardrobe. At 10:07, she zipped up the only blazer she owned. Black, slightly faded at the shoulders but structured. At 10:39, she locked her apartment door and stepped into the unknown. By 10:57, Ruby stood in the marbled lobby of Russo International, a place that screamed power in muted golds and glass walls. A woman at the reception desk didn't ask for her name, just handed her a keycard and said, 45th floor. Mr. Russo's legal team is expecting you. Elevator doors closed. She ascended. Each second ticked like a countdown, her mind racing. She didn't know what they would offer. But something told her this wasn't about a job or a grant. It was something else, and whatever it was, it would come with a price. The elevator glided upward in smooth silence, the kind that made Ruby more aware of her own heartbeat than the machine's movement. Each floor ticked by on a small golden screen. 37, 38, 40, 45. With a soft chime, the doors opened to a hallway wrapped in dark wood, frosted glass, and brushed steel. A private floor, no reception, no foot traffic, just an intimidating sense of precision. The kind of place where decisions weren't made, they were enforced. A man in a gray suit stood waiting. His face held no smile, only duty. Ms. Morgan, he said, as though confirming an item off a checklist. This way. He led her through glass doors into a boardroom unlike anything Ruby had ever seen. 12 feet high, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's skyline, a single marble table stretching across the room like a runway. At the far end sat 2 men and 1 woman, all dressed in the kind of tailored attire that suggested they billed by the second, not the hour. Please, the woman gestured to a chair. Ruby sat. The leather was colder than she expected. No one offered coffee. No one asked how she was. The woman, mid-40s, sharp-angled features and eyes that had likely ruined 1,000 contracts, slid a document across the table. A gold pen rested on top. What is this? Ruby asked, keeping her voice steady. The man to her left answered. A surrogacy and marital contract. Ruby blinked. I think you have the wrong person. No, the woman replied, folding her hands. We are very confident we have the right one. Ruby looked down at the first page. Her name was typed in all caps at the top. The words legal matrimonial agreement and binding surrogacy clause stared back at her like a dare. This isn't real, Ruby murmured. The woman's voice didn't waver. You've been selected to enter into a 1-year marital contract with our client, Mr. Dominic Russo. As part of the agreement, you will undergo medical procedures to ensure conception. Upon confirmation of a viable pregnancy, you will receive a payment of $10 million, with further compensation upon delivery of a child. Ruby stared at them, not blinking, not breathing. This is human trafficking, she said, stunned. It is not, the man on the right replied flatly. It is a legal agreement between 2 consenting adults. Consenting? I haven't agreed to anything, she snapped. Yet, the woman said. Ruby stood, heart pounding. I came here thinking this was a job offer, a grant. I didn't expect to be treated like livestock. The third lawyer, silent until now, finally spoke, voice low and practiced. Miss Morgan, please allow us to explain. She hesitated. The man took it as permission. You were chosen because of your medical profile. Clean family history, high fertility indicators, no genetic disorders. More importantly, you are discreet, without ties to the press and unlikely to sell your story to tabloids. You're principled, private, and have a compelling financial need. You've been watching me, she whispered. We've been vetting candidates for 2 years, the woman confirmed. Your files stood out. Ruby's hands curled into fists. You think you can just buy a womb? No, the man said. We're offering a mutually beneficial agreement. Your brother's medical care will be fully funded within 24 hours of your signature. Additionally, you will retain full rights to any child you bear, should Mr. Russo waive parental claim. Or, should he choose to raise the child, a joint custody arrangement will be negotiated. Stop, Ruby said sharply. This is disgusting. The room went still. We understand this is overwhelming, the woman said, her tone cooling further. But time is a luxury you don't have. We suggest you read the contract before dismissing what may be the only way to save your brother's life. Ruby sat back down, not because she wanted to, but because her legs were shaking. Her eyes flicked to the fine print. $10 million. Full coverage of Marcus's medical expenses, including transport, surgery, post-op, and private recovery care. A 1-year marriage contract with a pre-agreed end date, and no spousal obligations beyond public appearances and cohabitation. A clause confirming no sexual obligations unless mutually agreed. A stipulation allowing Ruby to walk away after the contract, provided she does not breach confidentiality or terminate the pregnancy by choice. It read like fiction. And yet, here it was. She looked up. Why is he doing this? Mr. Russo requires an heir, the woman said simply. For legal and business reasons. No girlfriends, no mistresses. He couldn't find someone willing in the usual way. Let's just say, the man replied, Mr. Russo prefers arrangements without emotional entanglements. Ruby almost laughed. He wants a baby without having to fall in love. He wants a future without being vulnerable, the woman corrected carefully. Ruby's throat went dry. She didn't know this man, but she already hated him. Tell him to find a robot, she said, rising again. I'm not for sale. The lead lawyer didn't flinch. You have 72 hours. After that, the offer expires, and the funding window for your brother's treatment closes with it. Outside, the city roared, car horns, voices, machinery grinding the hours away. But inside Ruby's mind, there was only silence. She walked 10 blocks before realizing she hadn't stopped moving. She didn't remember leaving the building, didn't recall the elevator, didn't even remember the name of the street she stood on now. Just those words. $10 million, 72 hours, and Marcus. Always Marcus. She pulled out her phone, scrolled to his latest ECG results, reread the cardiologist's notes, as if doing so might change them. They wouldn't. She looked up at the sky. The clouds were darker now. A storm was coming. So was a choice. Vivian Lee answered the door with a mug of herbal tea and a frown that had become second nature. You look like hell, she said, ushering Ruby inside without asking questions. I think someone just offered to buy my soul, Ruby muttered, her coat still dripping from the rain. Vivian didn't flinch. She'd known Ruby long enough to read between the words. Sit down, tell me everything. Over the next 20 minutes, the story poured out. The mysterious letter, the marble boardroom, the proposal, the lawyers, the price. When Ruby finished, Vivian stared at her for a long, heavy moment. So let me get this straight, she said finally. Some billionaire wants to marry you, get you pregnant, and pay you $10 million for the honor? There's no other way to say it. He's not even doing it himself. He sent a pack of lawyers. Vivian crossed her arms. And you're considering it? No, Ruby snapped, then softened. I mean, I wasn't. But now I don't know. Silence hung in the air, thick with guilt and desperation. Vivian looked down at her tea. You once told me you'd rather die broke than sell your integrity. That was before Marcus started dying. The words tasted bitter. Ruby hadn't said them aloud before. Saying them made it real. Vivian's voice trembled. There has to be another way. There isn't. There has to be. I've tried everything, Viv. I begged galleries, applied for grants, cried in front of insurance reps. Nothing moved the needle. They all say the same thing. We're sorry, we truly are, but experimental procedures aren't covered, and unfortunately... She stopped. Her throat closed. Vivian leaned forward. So what? You go through with it? Become a contract wife? A human incubator? I become Marcus's only hope? The pain twisted in Ruby's chest, not just because of the choice, but because she didn't know what terrified her more, accepting the deal or rejecting it. Vivian reached for her hand. You shouldn't have to sacrifice yourself to save him. Ruby met her gaze. Then who else will? That night, Ruby returned to the hospital. The corridors smelled of bleach and quiet sorrow. Nurses passed by with tired eyes. Machines beeped like tired reminders of mortality. She slipped into Marcus's room. He was asleep, his breathing shallow, chest rising beneath two thin sheets. Tubes snaked from his arm to a nearby fourth. His skin was pale, his frame fragile, a shadow of the boy he used to be. Ruby sank into the chair beside his bed. She remembered the last time he smiled. 2 weeks ago. They were watching an old superhero movie, one they'd seen a dozen times. He'd quoted the lines, mimicking the hero's voice. They'd laughed so hard, the nurse had come in to check on them. He hadn't laughed since. She brushed a curl from his forehead. Hey, Mars, she whispered. You remember when we were little, and Mom used to tell us that superheroes didn't always wear capes, that sometimes they looked just like ordinary people? Her voice broke. I want to be that for you, but I don't know how. He stirred slightly but didn't wake. She watched him sleep, and the memories came. The fire. That night. Smoke choking the hallway. The sound of their mother screaming Marcus's name. The heat. The terror. The way Ruby had clutched her little brother and dragged him down the stairs, coughing, crying, running. Their parents hadn't made it out. She remembered the promise she'd made at their funeral. I'll always take care of you. He was 7. She was 14. Too young to make such a vow, but old enough to mean it. And now, here they were. She had kept every promise, until now. Now, all she had left to give was herself. By morning, Ruby stood outside the hospital, watching the sunrise bleed over the city skyline. Her hands were in her coat pockets. Her heart was no longer in her chest. It was somewhere in that room beside Marcus, beating in time with his. She walked, not to clear her mind, but to decide her fate. Her next stop was Midtown, a small law office squeezed between a bakery and a dry cleaner. Inside, a man in wire-rimmed glasses looked up from a stack of files. Ruby, he said warmly. Been a while. Hi, Paul. I need a favor. He raised an eyebrow. You bringing me another copyright dispute? Not this time. She pulled the folded contract from her bag. I need you to read this, and tell me if I'm about to ruin my life. Paul took the papers, adjusted his glasses, and began flipping through. With each page, his face darkened. When he finished, he looked up. This is ironclad, he said. Everything's covered. Financial terms, legal indemnities, exit clauses, medical rights. So it's legit? Oh, it's real. And it's written by people who've done this before. Ruby's chest sank. Would you do it? Paul didn't answer immediately. You're not me, he said finally. You're a sister, and right now, you're standing at the edge of a cliff. I know. He leaned forward. Just don't jump unless you know you can live with the landing. Back at her apartment, Ruby stared at her reflection. She looked the same, but she wasn't. Something inside her had shifted. She thought of Marcus, of his heart fighting against time. She thought of Dominic Russo, and the life he wanted built from contracts and bloodlines. She thought of the day she'd promised to protect her brother, no matter the cost. And she realized the cost was her. The Russo penthouse wasn't just high above the city. It felt carved from another world entirely. Ruby stepped out of the private elevator into a cathedral of glass and stone. Everything was cold marble, clean lines and shadows softened only by the amber hue of sunset through 20-foot windows. Manhattan shimmered beneath them like a conquered kingdom. A man stood by the window, his back to her, tall, still, composed in the way statues are, designed to intimidate. Dominic Russo. She had seen pictures. None prepared her for presence. He turned only slightly at the sound of her footsteps. Ms. Morgan, his voice was low, precise, unapologetic. Ruby stood her ground. Mr. Russo. He motioned to a seat across from a sleek black table. She sat, spine straight. You came back, he said. I didn't say I wouldn't, but you didn't say you would either. I want to see your face when I say no, she replied coolly. His brow lifted, amused, not insulted. Then you've wasted a trip. I haven't said it yet. Dominic walked to a side cabinet and poured himself a glass of scotch. He didn't offer her one. This isn't a negotiation, Miss Morgan. I don't bargain. Ruby studied him. The expensive suit, the practiced movements, the absence of warmth in his eyes. Not cruel, but carefully fortified, so I'm told. He sat across from her, placing a black folder on the table. I assume you've read the contract. I did. And I think it's the coldest thing I've ever seen, written in ink. Dominic didn't flinch. It's a business transaction. You're talking about a child. I'm talking about a legacy. Ruby leaned in. And you think that's something you can schedule and sign for like a quarterly merger? Yes. The room fell silent. He studied her with clinical detachment. You're here because of your brother. Not because you believe in fairy tales. I'm here because your lawyer said time was running out. Dominic nodded slowly. Then let's not waste what little of it remains. He slid the folder closer. Ruby didn't touch it. I've done my research on you too, he said. Her jaw tightened. Ruby Morgan, artist. Raised your brother after your parents died in a fire. Refused to give him up to state care. Took jobs cleaning offices and painting portraits to pay tuition. No criminal record. No lawsuits. No press. No addictions. You forgot emotionally cornered, she said bitterly. I didn't forget, Dominic said quietly. It's the reason you're the only person I considered. She blinked. That's supposed to be flattering? No, it's supposed to be honest. Ruby stood. You don't know anything about me. He rose too, not aggressive, but dominant, like someone used to filling the room. I know you're loyal enough to sacrifice yourself, and smart enough to see what's in front of you. She paced to the window, her reflection fractured across the city's skyline. Do you know what it feels like to put everything you are into saving someone else, only to watch them slip further away every day? I know what it means to be powerless in a hospital hallway, he said, his voice suddenly distant. I've buried more family than I care to remember. For the first time, his armor cracked. Ruby turned, softer now. Then why would you make this so transactional? Because emotions cloud judgment. Maybe that's the problem. Dominic looked at her for a long time, then walked to a drawer and retrieved a sealed envelope. Your brother's name is on the transfer form. Should you agree tonight, the first half of the funds will be wired by morning. He placed it beside the folder. You have until midnight. She stared at both. The folder, the envelope. One held Marcus's salvation, the other held her surrender. Do I even get to meet the man I'll be married to? She asked bitterly. Dominic held her gaze. You just did. Back outside, the air felt colder, sharper. Ruby walked the 5 blocks to the hospital. She didn't remember the intersections. Just her reflection in every glass wall she passed. She looked like herself, but nothing inside her felt familiar anymore. The apartment had never felt smaller. Ruby stood barefoot in the center of her studio, staring at the sealed envelope Dominic had given her. It sat on the kitchen counter like a ticking bomb. She hadn't touched it, hadn't dared. Everything inside her screamed to walk away. But something quieter, deeper, the voice of the sister, the protector, kept whispering, "Open it." She spent the night researching him. Again, Dominic Russo. There were no scandals, no headlines about women, no messy divorces, just silence. And silence, Ruby knew, was always intentional. She found news clippings about his father, Dario Russo, once called the Wall Street warlord, before a stroke left him bedridden and mentally declining. Dominic had taken control of the empire at 29. He hadn't given a single interview since. She found an article buried behind financial reports. A throwaway line about a lawsuit filed by an ex-fiancé who'd vanished from the press 2 months later. No resolution, no follow-up. Dominic Russo didn't make enemies. He erased them. Still, there was no mention of violence, no criminal ties, just wealth, control, and ambition that came without apology. A machine disguised as a man. But machines didn't ask for children. Machines didn't offer to share custody. Something didn't add up. At noon, Ruby met with Dr. Henley, Marcus's cardiologist. A kind man, tired eyes, steady voice. "I won't sugarcoat this," he said. "Marcus is hanging on by days, not weeks. The sooner we move forward with treatment, the better his odds." Ruby sat frozen. And the surgery? It's still experimental, costly, but it's his best shot. Will he survive long enough to be transferred to the facility? With immediate clearance and private air support, yes. Outside the hospital, Ruby called her old law school friend, Lena Torres. They hadn't spoken in a year, but Lena's voice was warm and familiar. "Yeah. Listen, I need you to look at something, confidential." "I'll owe you big, you already do," Lena teased. "Send it over." Within an hour, they were sitting in a coffee shop near Bryant Park. Lena had read the entire contract twice. "This is insane," she said, "but airtight. They've covered everything." Ruby stirred her tea without drinking. "Anything illegal?" "No." "Immoral?" "Maybe. But you'd be protected legally. There's an exit clause after birth, non-disclosure boundaries, medical autonomy. It's clear they don't want drama. They want control." Ruby exhaled. "Would you do it?" Lena paused. "I don't know, but I'd understand if you did." He was awake this time, watching cartoons, smiling faintly. She remembered when he was 5 and broke his arm. He hadn't cried. Just sat there, stoic and quiet, while she panicked. "You're the brave one," he'd said afterward. "I only made it because you held my hand." Ruby felt her knees weaken. How do you measure a decision like this? Not with morals, not with logic, not even with fear. You measure it with love. At 10:52 p.m., Ruby sat in her apartment. The contract open on her lap, the pen in her hand. She stared at the last line, signature of Party A, Ruby Morgan. She signed. And with that stroke, her life fractured in two, before and after. Morning came with overcast skies and a gray hush that made the city feel like it was holding its breath. Ruby stood before the revolving doors of Russo International once more, no longer as a visitor, but as a participant. She wore the same black blazer, this time ironed. Her hair was pulled back, her face composed, but underneath she felt like scaffolding barely holding together. She pressed the elevator button with fingers that no longer shook. 45 floors up, the legal team waited in a walnut-paneled conference room, same marble tables, same silence. But this time, Dominic Russo was there in person, seated at the head. He didn't greet her. He didn't need to. The lawyers began. One by one, clauses were read aloud, sections reviewed. Ruby initialed each page with practiced detachment. When asked, she confirmed her understanding of the marriage contract, the surrogacy agreement, the confidentiality terms, and the post-birth settlement. Then came the final page. Signature of Party A, the woman said. Ruby picked up the pen. Her hand didn't tremble this time. The woman turned to Dominic. "Mr. Russo." Without a word, he leaned forward, signed his name in 2 quick strokes, then slid the pen back. No ceremony, no pretense, just completion. "Congratulations," the lawyer said. "You are now legally married." Ruby blinked. That was it. No rings, no vows, just ink on paper. Dominic rose first. "You'll be moved into the penthouse this evening. A driver will arrive at 6. Any personal effects you wish to bring should be packed." "I can't stay with my brother until he's stable?" His jaw twitched. "I'll arrange a temporary allowance for that." "Thank you," she said stiffly. It wasn't gratitude, just acknowledgement. "Do you have questions?" he asked. "Just one," Ruby said, looking directly at him. "Why didn't you just adopt?" He didn't smile. "I don't want a legacy I didn't create." And just like that, he walked out of the room. Later that day, Ruby returned to the hospital one last time, not as Marcus's guardian, but now as someone with power. The transfer was already underway. An exclusive medical team was flying in that night. Marcus would be airlifted to a specialized facility in Boston by morning. Ruby's name was now tied to a $10 million trust earmarked solely for his treatment. It was done, but nothing felt like victory. She sat beside him, brushing her fingers against his hand. "They're going to take good care of you now, Mars," she whispered. "You'll get better. Stronger." His eyelids fluttered open. "You did it, didn't you?" She didn't answer, just nodded. He didn't ask how. Maybe he already knew. Maybe he was too tired to care. "I don't want you to be alone," he murmured. "I won't be," she lied. That evening, the driver came. The car was black, the interior sterile. Ruby brought one suitcase and her sketch pad. That was all she could carry that still felt like hers. The penthouse was colder than she remembered. Genevieve Rousseau was waiting, tall, angular, dressed in pearl gray with diamonds at her throat and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So," she said, examining Ruby like a curator inspecting a flawed statue, "you're the womb we're renting." Ruby stiffened. "I'm your daughter-in-law now." Genevieve's smile widened. "Only on paper, darling. And don't forget it." Dominic appeared behind her. Genevieve turned with a smooth pivot. "I'm just welcoming the new bride." "Leave her," Dominic said. It wasn't a suggestion. Genevieve left with the grace of a queen dismissed from court. Ruby exhaled slowly. Dominic gestured toward a hallway. "Your room is down there. You'll find everything arranged." Ruby followed his direction, but stopped at the threshold. Inside, the suite was immaculate. Soft lighting, cream linens, a balcony overlooking the river. But everything felt sterile, too perfect. He stood behind her, arms crossed. "Something wrong?" "No pictures," she said softly. "No history. No soul." He didn't answer. "I won't be just a function, Dominic." His name hung between them like a challenge. "You signed a contract," he said. "I signed to save a life, not surrender mine." He studied her. "You'll find that in this world they're often the same," and with that, he walked away. Alone in the silence, Ruby sat on the edge of the bed. Her wedding ring was still in its velvet box. No one had placed it on her finger. There would be no honeymoon, no celebration, waiting to be monitored, to be implanted, to be used. But she was here by choice, and she would not forget why. This was not the end. This was the beginning. They called it a wedding, but to Ruby it felt more like a corporate acquisition. The ceremony was held in a private wing of the Met cloisters, quiet, cold, and exclusive. Only 12 guests attended. None of them smiled. Most carried briefcases. Dominic wore a black tailored suit with a charcoal tie. No boutonniere, no vows, no emotion. Ruby stood beside him in a long ivory dress selected by his assistant 2 days prior. It fit perfectly. It also felt like armor. The officiant, a retired judge, read from a script that sounded more like a merger clause than a union of souls. There were no tears, no laughter, just signatures. Cameras clicked only when instructed. 2 rings were exchanged. Neither made contact with the other's skin before being slid onto fingers. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the judge said, closing the leather-bound booklet. No kiss followed, just silence. Outside the cloisters, a wall of photographers waited behind barricades. Though they couldn't see inside, rumors had already spread. Tabloids speculated wildly. An arranged marriage, a family power grab, a secret pregnancy. Dominic Rousseau marries unknown artist in shock private ceremony. Who is Ruby Morgan? New Mrs. Rousseau shuns all interviews. Billionaire's bride? Genius or gold digger? None of them knew the truth, and Ruby couldn't tell them. As the couple emerged, Dominic placed a hand on the small of her back, perfectly timed for the cameras. His grip was light, measured. To onlookers it looked like affection. To Ruby, it was choreography. They posed, smiled faintly, and returned to the car. The applause was polite. The silence inside the Rolls-Royce, however, was deafening. Back at the penthouse, a small reception was laid out. Caviar, crystal flutes, champagne she didn't drink. No friends, no family, just staff in black uniforms offering to top her glass every few minutes. Ruby stood alone beside a tall window, looking out at the city's skyline. She could see the Empire State Building lit up in white, like a cake for someone else's celebration. Dominic entered, loosened his tie, and poured himself a drink. "It's done," he said. She nodded. "Yes, you'll receive a call tomorrow to begin your medical schedule." She swallowed. "Right." Dominic glanced at her, his tone unchanged. "You did well. Thanks," she said dryly. "Did I pass inspection?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned away, walking toward his study. Later that night, Ruby sat alone on the edge of her bed, still in the dress. She hadn't changed yet, hadn't unpinned her hair. It felt wrong to call it her wedding day. Weddings were supposed to be joyful, intimate, terrifying in their vulnerability. This had been none of those things. It had been a transaction, one she agreed to, one she signed for. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, her eyes too calm, her shoulders too still. She had made the noble choice. She had saved her brother. But as the night stretched long and cold, Ruby wondered something she hadn't allowed herself to feel until now. Had she sold something that could never be bought back? The Russo estate wasn't a house. It was a fortress disguised as a palace. Set behind wrought iron gates in the heart of Upper Manhattan's most discreet enclave, the mansion stretched across 3 connected townhomes, merged, gutted, and reconstructed into a single monolith of quiet wealth. The limestone facade bore no name, no number, just an intercom, a private security team, and an iron silence that seemed to echo its master. Ruby arrived 2 days after the ceremony. The staff lined up as if awaiting royalty. 6 in total, a live-in chef, a housekeeper, a groundskeeper, 2 personal assistants, and the head butler, Mr. Keller, silver-haired and eerily silent unless addressed. None of them made eye contact for long. All of them had clearly been briefed. Dominic wasn't there to greet her. Instead, Keller showed her to the East Wing. "This is your residence, Mrs. Russo," he said, gesturing toward a sprawling suite larger than her entire childhood home. "His quarters are on the opposite end of the house. You'll be undisturbed unless summoned." The word summoned caught in her throat. "Thank you," she murmured. She was left alone with a luggage cart and a wardrobe already filled. The room was perfect, cream-colored walls, custom drapery, a king-size bed dressed in ivory silk, 3 vanities, a walk-in closet that looked more like a boutique, and not a single thing that belonged to her. She opened a drawer. Inside was a row of pastel nightgowns, lace, silk, tags still attached. Not one item was of her choosing. Even the books lining the sitting room shelves were curated, European classics, business memoirs, and medical journals. Not a single novel, not a single canvas. She unpacked what little she had, 1 sketch pad, 2 paintbrushes, a tiny watercolor set nearly dried out. A single photograph of Marcus, taped to the back of her planner. She placed the photo on the bedside table. It was the only real thing in the room. That night, dinner was served in the main dining room. A long glass table stretched between 2 tall windows. Ruby sat at one end. Dominic arrived late, took the opposite chair, and nodded once in acknowledgement. Neither spoke through the first course. "Everything to your standard?" he asked over the main course. "It's beautiful," she replied, picking at the perfectly seared salmon. "You may redecorate your quarters if you wish. Just inform Keller. I'll paint instead." He paused, curious. "What do you paint?" "People, places, memories. You're sentimental. I'm human." The silence that followed was heavier than the crystal chandelier above them. After dessert, he left the room without a word. Ruby remained behind, listening to the echo of her own fork against porcelain. Back in her wing, she stood on the private balcony and watched the city blink beneath her. She had a view people paid millions for. She had a bed that had never been touched. She had silence, and silence could be louder than grief. She tried to make the space her own. She rearranged the furniture, bought clay pots for the windowsills, filled a drawer with art supplies from a downtown studio. Still, the walls didn't breathe with her. Every door she opened was quiet. Every hallway she passed held her reflection in polished glass. She wandered into rooms without purpose, a piano room, a greenhouse with no plants, a library with dustless spines, each one perfect, each one hollow. The staff addressed her as Madame Russo, always with lowered eyes, always with practiced politeness. She thanked them by name, smiled, asked questions. They responded with measured answers, then vanished like smoke. Even her meals arrived with silence. She stopped eating in the dining room. She stopped expecting anyone to knock. She slept alone in silk sheets and woke to the same stillness she fell asleep in. On the 4th night, she sat on the floor of her walk-in closet, her sketchpad on her lap, and finally let herself cry. Not because she was sad, but because she was empty. She had saved her brother. But at what cost? And what would be left of her when this was all over? The medical wing was hidden in the west side of the mansion, an entire floor remodeled into a private clinic. Sterile, pristine, silent. Every Monday and Thursday morning at precisely 9 a.m., Ruby descended the elevator alone, walked past glass-walled exam rooms, and signed her name at a desk no one else used. No waiting, no small talk, just appointments that arrived like clockwork and left like shadows. The first visit began with blood work. Then came the scans. Hormonal panels, pelvic exams, genetic compatibility screenings, diet consultations, lifestyle modifications, weekly injections to prime the body. Everything was scheduled, logged, measured. Nothing was explained unless she asked. The lead fertility specialist, Dr. Calvert, was polite but mechanical. "You're responding well to the protocol," he said after the 4th session. "If levels remain stable, we'll move to embryo transfer within 2 weeks." Ruby nodded, numb. She wasn't afraid of the process. She was afraid of how little she felt. Each time she left the medical wing, she returned to her suite with a quieter version of herself. Her body had become a project, a goal, a clinical vessel waiting for a deadline. She started dreaming of white rooms and ticking clocks. Even her sketches began to change. No faces, just empty outlines, frames without people, cribs without babies. At dinner one evening, Dominic asked, "Are the treatments progressing?" Ruby looked up from her plate. "They are." He didn't ask anything further. No, "How do you feel?" No, "Are you okay?" Just silence, and she didn't offer more. The day of the embryo transfer, the air outside was bright and cold. Ruby sat in a reclined exam chair wearing a surgical gown and staring at the ceiling tiles. A nurse explained the procedure in a hushed tone, her voice mechanical. Ruby nodded through every step: catheter, implantation, rest. The fertilized embryos had been chosen for viability. Healthy, male and female, balanced chromosomes, the future narrowed to a petri dish and a digital screen. "You'll need to lie flat for at least 2 hours afterward," the nurse said, checking the monitor. Ruby didn't respond. Her body was present. Her spirit was somewhere else. Halfway through the recovery window, the door opened. She expected a nurse. Instead, Dominic Russo stepped inside. He wasn't dressed for business. No suit, just a navy pullover and slacks, still composed, but quieter, less steel. Ruby sat up slightly. "What are you doing here?" "I thought I should be," he said simply. "For what?" she asked. He gestured toward the monitor, where a grayscale image pulsed softly. "That." She looked away. "It's a little late for sentiment, don't you think?" "I didn't come here for sentiment." "Then why?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he sat in the chair beside her bed, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor. "When I was a boy," he said, voice steady, "my mother had 5 miscarriages. She didn't speak during the last 2, just cried behind locked doors. My father told me it was weakness." Ruby turned her head. She hadn't expected that. Dominic continued. "After she died, no one mentioned her name in our house again, as if her absence was easier than her pain." Silence wrapped around the room like gauze. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, "but I don't want this part of our contract to feel like another erasure." Ruby stared at him. For the first time, she saw something unguarded behind his eyes, something unfinished, and for the first time, she didn't hate him. She reached for the blanket and adjusted it across her legs. "Then stop acting like a CEO and try being human." Dominic looked up, meeting her eyes. "Is that a request or a condition?" "It's a start." That night, Ruby didn't sleep. She lay in bed, one hand resting lightly on her stomach, trying to imagine what might be growing inside her. A life, a future. A choice that had once felt like sacrifice now felt like responsibility. She wasn't just a surrogate anymore. She was the only person who could protect what came next. The mansion had its quiet hours. Between 2 and 5 a.m., the staff vanished to their quarters. The security lights dimmed. The city's sounds beyond the walls softened to whispers. That's when Ruby wandered. Insomnia had replaced routine. She wandered the halls barefoot, passing by doors she hadn't yet opened, rooms she'd never been invited into. Sometimes she counted her steps just to anchor herself. Other times she simply followed instinct. One night she opened a door she assumed led to another guest room. It led to a gallery, a private one. 12 paintings lined the walls, each bathed in soft amber light. No labels, no plaques, just canvases that breathed. They weren't like anything Ruby had seen before. These were not collector's items or displays of power. They were deeply personal. Dark brushstrokes, twisted angles, raw emotions bleeding through color. One painting drew her in. A boy, small, no more than 6, standing alone in a field of blurred shapes. His face was unfinished, his eyes hollow. The sky behind him was dark and bleeding. Ruby stepped closer. The signature was in the lower right corner, her breath caught. Dominic Russo had painted these. She didn't hear him enter. "You weren't meant to find this room," Dominic said quietly. Ruby turned. He wasn't angry, just exposed. "You painted them," she said. He nodded. "Once a long time ago. They're beautiful." "No, they're honest." He walked past her, stopping in front of the boy in the field. "I painted this after my mother's funeral. I couldn't remember her face, just how it felt when she stopped singing in the house." Ruby looked at the canvas again. The void in the boy's expression was suddenly more haunting. "I didn't think you had this in you," she admitted. "I don't show people things I want to keep." "Then why leave the door unlocked?" A long pause. "Maybe I hoped you'd find it," he said, barely above a whisper. They didn't speak for a while, just stood among the memories he'd buried in paint. Then, without a word, Dominic turned and left the room. Ruby stayed a while longer, letting her fingers skim the air in front of the canvases, as if touching the pain might grant her understanding. 2 nights later they met again, this time in the kitchen. She had come down for warm milk, a childhood remedy. He was already there barefoot, wearing a plain black t-shirt and pajama pants, slicing an apple at the counter. She blinked in disbelief. "You eat after midnight?" He raised an eyebrow. "I don't sleep much." She poured her milk. "Me neither." They stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then she said, "I found your sketch of the woman in the rain." His hand paused mid-slice. "Which one?" "The one on the back wall. She looks like she's trying to outrun something that already lives inside her." He stared at the counter. "That was the last one I painted." "Why'd you stop?" "Because I realized I was painting to forget instead of to feel." Ruby sipped her milk. "And now I run companies instead." She nodded. "Safe, controlled, no mess," he said. "No healing either." He turned to her. "What about you? Why do you paint?" She thought for a moment. "Because it's the only time I'm allowed to feel without permission." That answer seemed to linger in the room longer than any of their others. Dominic placed a slice of apple in front of her. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away immediately. That night, Ruby didn't cry before bed, and when she finally slept, she dreamed of color, not silence. The invitation arrived in a black envelope embossed with gold. The Russo Foundation annual charity gala. Formal attire, press expected, no excuses. Ruby stared at it for a full minute before placing it face down. She had never been to a gala before, never worn a designer gown, never practiced a smile that meant nothing, but now she was Mrs. Russo, and the world was watching. The dress was chosen for her, a custom couture piece in deep emerald silk that clung at the waist and shimmered under light. A stylist spent 3 hours shaping her hair into a soft wave. Makeup artists dusted gold across her eyelids, crimson on her lips. By the time they were finished, Ruby barely recognized herself. She looked like someone's idea of power. Dominic wore a tailored midnight tuxedo, impeccable, sharp. When he entered her suite, his eyes passed over her with calm approval. "You clean up well," he said. She lifted her chin. "So do you." They didn't touch, but their silence was less strained now. Familiar. A car waited downstairs. Paparazzi lined the barricades as they stepped out. The flashes began before the doors even closed. "Mr. Russo, look this way. Mrs. Russo, are the rumors true? Are you expecting? Was it love at first sight?" Dominic placed a hand at the small of her back. To the cameras, it looked like support. To Ruby, it was defense. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers sparkled like constellations. White roses bloomed on every table. Waiters floated with champagne trays. Every guest wore a name that carried weight. Investors, diplomats, celebrities, heirs. Genevieve Russo arrived late, draped in silver, surrounded by whispers, smiling like she owned the air itself. She approached with the grace of a serpent. "Darling," she purred to Ruby, "I've just told the press you were discovered painting murals in subway stations. They love a poverty-to-palace story." Ruby didn't blink. "I'll be sure to tell them you inspired my most dramatic character study." Genevieve's eyes sharpened, but the smile never left her face. Still charming, still disposable. Dominic arrived beside them, silent as a storm. "Genevieve," he said. "Just getting acquainted with your bride," she replied sweetly. "She's not your concern," he said flatly. For the first time, Genevieve's composure cracked. "Everything bearing the Russo name is my concern." Dominic's voice didn't rise, but it hardened. "Not anymore." The silence between them pulled taut. Then Genevieve excused herself with a venomous smile and drifted away into the crowd. Ruby exhaled. Dominic turned to her. "You held your own. I've had practice," she said. Their eyes met, and for a moment they stood not as strangers, not as pawns, but as allies. The night pressed on with toasts, handshakes, and false laughter. Ruby smiled when expected, answered questions without revealing anything. She was aware of every camera flash, every side glance, every whisper. But beneath it all, something unexpected bloomed. She was no longer hiding. She was performing, and doing it well. Later that evening, after the speeches and the dancing, Dominic offered her his arm. "Let's go," he said. Outside, the car was waiting, but this time Ruby didn't feel like a passenger. She felt like a partner in something neither of them had fully defined. Not yet. But it was coming. The symptoms started quietly. Ruby noticed them during a breakfast meeting with the Foundation's art curator. An unexpected wave of nausea, a sharp twinge of lightheadedness, then an overwhelming fatigue that seemed to settle deep into her bones. By the third morning of vomiting, she called Dr. Calvert's office. They scheduled her immediately. It was supposed to be a routine check, blood work, hormone panels, maybe a preliminary scan. But as Ruby lay back in the ultrasound chair, gown open, lights dimmed, she sensed a tension in the room that hadn't been there before. The technician's smile faltered. "I'm going to call Dr. Calvert in," she said. "Is something wrong?" Ruby asked, heart suddenly pounding. The technician didn't answer. Minutes later, Dr. Calvert entered, eyes glued to the monitor. He adjusted the wand, clicked a few keys, then sat back slowly in his chair. Ruby sat up. "Say something." He hesitated. "You're pregnant." A wave of emotion surged through her, relief, disbelief, and something closer to fear. "But there's more." Her stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" He turned the screen toward her. 4 small flickers pulsed on the monitor, 4 individual sacs, 4 distinct heartbeats. "Quadruplets," he said. "You're carrying 4—" Ruby couldn't speak. The room tilted. Her breath caught in her throat. "We'll need to monitor you closely," Calvert continued. "More clinical now. Multiple pregnancies carry high risks. Preterm labor, gestational hypertension, placental complications." Ruby didn't hear the rest. All she could see were 4 lives. 4 souls growing inside her. 4 futures she hadn't imagined, now utterly real. Dominic arrived less than 20 minutes after she called him. He found her sitting alone in the consultation room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Ruby looked up, her voice distant. "It is—" She handed him the scan image. He stared at it, then looked again. "This isn't right. It's real," she said. "I asked twice." He sat slowly, the paper trembling slightly in his hand, though his expression remained carved from stone. "Quadruplets," he said aloud. The words sounded foreign on his tongue. "They're healthy," Ruby added, "but it's a high-risk pregnancy." Dominic set the image down. For the first time since she met him, he didn't speak immediately, didn't offer a solution, just sat there, silent, overwhelmed. "We'll fly in the best specialists. I'll relocate any medical team necessary." She blinked. "You're not angry?" He looked at her sharply. "Why would I be angry?" "Because this wasn't the plan," Dominic exhaled. "Neither was my mother dying when I was 10, or my father forgetting my name after his stroke. Plans are illusions, Ruby. Life doesn't care about contracts." She stared at him. He ran a hand through his hair, then stood. "You'll move to the south wing," he said. "We'll reconfigure the floor for medical care. I want round-the-clock staff, no stress, no outside appearances unless medically cleared." She rose too. "Dominic, I can handle—" He turned to face her. "You shouldn't have to—" That stopped her, because it wasn't command, it was concern, real, undisguised. She saw it in the way his brow creased, in the way his hands flexed at his sides, in the way he avoided her gaze, not out of arrogance, but fear. She stepped closer. "This changes everything." He nodded. "Yes, it does." By nightfall, every floor of the mansion had shifted. A prenatal team arrived the next morning. Specialists in high-order multiple pregnancies, neonatal surgeons, maternal-fetal medicine doctors. A chef was brought in to manage Ruby's diet. A security team reviewed the building's emergency protocols. Dominic signed off on every line. But he didn't leave her side for the first 2 days. He worked from a chair near her new suite, laptop on his knees, phone calls hushed. Occasionally he looked at her, not like a contract holder, but like someone slowly coming to terms with the idea of being needed. On the 3rd day, Ruby woke from a nap to find him sketching in a small notebook. She watched him quietly. His lines were sharp but hesitant. He hadn't lost his eye, only his confidence. "You still draw," she said softly. He didn't look up. "Not for anyone." "Why not?" He hesitated. "Because creating something means I have to feel something." She sat up. "And now?" He finally looked at her. "Now I'm terrified." The silence stretched between them. She reached for his hand. This time, he didn't pull away. The doctor's voice was calm but firm. "From this point on, we're recommending partial bed rest. The risk of preterm labor increases exponentially with quadruplets, and your last scan showed early signs of cervical shortening." Ruby didn't argue. She nodded, staring at the ceiling of the private clinic room, hand pressed lightly to her belly where 4 lives moved beneath the surface like whispers. She didn't feel sick. Not yet. But her body had started sending signals, tightness in the lower abdomen, fatigue that clung like fog, a strange ache in her hips, small things, until they weren't. By the time Dominic arrived, the medical team had already issued strict orders, limited walking, no stairs, no long-standing activities. Rest, monitor, wait. He entered the room in a dark overcoat, his jaw tense. "They're fine," Ruby said before he could speak, "but I'm grounded." Dominic absorbed the news without flinching. He nodded once, then turned to Dr. Calvert. "Build what she needs, whatever it takes." Within 24 hours, her suite was transformed. A hospital-grade bed replaced the plush one. Monitoring equipment was installed discreetly behind sliding panels. A nutritionist updated her meal plan. Nurses rotated on 12-hour shifts. Dominic moved his office into the adjoining room. He canceled overseas meetings, declined 3 conferences, reduced his daily calls to 2 hours, mornings only. By the end of the week, he was present, not just in the hallway, but in the space. He read emails beside her as she dozed, took meetings in whispers across the sitting room, brought her tea each evening at exactly 9 p.m., never announcing it, never explaining why. The mansion's air shifted, not louder, not softer, just closer. At first, their conversation stayed neutral. How are the contractions? Minor. Braxton Hicks, they said. Anything unusual today? Just you eating lunch before 3 p.m. They moved around each other like clockwork, predictable, cordial. But something else hummed beneath the surface. One night, Dominic brought her a book from the private library. You said you liked historical fiction. She looked at the cover, the painted veil. I never said that. You looked at it for 12 minutes the last time you were there. She stared at him. You memorized how long I looked at a book? He looked away. I remember things that matter. Ruby opened the first page, but she didn't read. Not then. She was too busy trying to make sense of a man who used silence as armor, but had begun to speak in gestures. It was Dr. Noah Brooks who noticed first. He arrived one afternoon with prenatal charts and stayed longer than usual. Dominic stood by the window, silent, as Ruby finished her exam. When Noah turned to leave, he paused, watching the way Dominic watched Ruby. He waited until Dominic left the room. Then, quietly, he said, You're not just a contract anymore, are you? She didn't need to, because in the way she looked down, in the way her fingers pressed gently over her belly, she already knew the boundaries were beginning to blur, and it scared her more than she wanted to admit. Genevieve Rousseau never operated with haste. She believed in patience, precision, the slow pull of strings rather than the crash of confrontation. But from the moment she learned of Ruby's pregnancy, a quiet fury took root in her chest. 4 children, quadruplets, a potential dynasty growing inside a woman she considered nothing more than an interloper. This was no longer a passing inconvenience. This was a threat. Her investigations began discreetly. 2 phone calls, 1 favor owed, a well-compensated PI with access to more databases than the average detective. Within days, a file landed on her mahogany desk. Ruby Morgan, 28, artist, legal guardian to Marcus Morgan, age 21, parents deceased in a fire. No inheritance, mountains of medical debt, a string of freelance jobs, 1 failed gallery opening, 0 social standing. She read every line twice, no criminal history, no media presence, no scandal. Still, Genevieve knew how to read between the lines. Ruby was desperate. Desperation could be manipulated. The hospital records were more illuminating. Marcus Morgan had been accepted into an experimental heart treatment program under anonymous financial sponsorship. Genevieve smiled. The dots were connecting. Dominic hadn't just chosen Ruby. He had saved her, and now she would repay him with leverage. Genevieve summoned Dr. Preston 3 days later. He arrived precisely on time, as she knew he would. He owed her, after she buried the negligent suit that could have ended his license 5 years prior. He was still ambitious, still morally flexible. She poured them both tea and slid the file across the table. I want a second opinion on the Rousseau pregnancy, she said. Dr. Preston hesitated. I thought she was under Calvert's care. She is, and she's well guarded. But everyone has weak spots. He opened the file, read silently. Quadruplets, partial bed rest, monitored vitals. He looked up. What exactly are you asking? I want you to find a reason, Genevieve said smoothly. Something that raises enough concern to merit intervention. You want me to sabotage the pregnancy? She smiled, thin and unflinching. I want you to protect the Rousseau name, and you will, because your medical grant renewal next quarter runs through one of my foundations. Preston swallowed hard. I'll need access. Leave that to me. Later that evening, Genevieve strolled through the east hallway of the mansion. Dominic wasn't home. Ruby was asleep, nurses monitoring her from the adjoining room. Genevieve lingered just outside the suite, staring at the closed door. She saw no mother, no wife, only a vessel, a woman temporarily holding power that was never meant for her. And if Genevieve had her way, that power would be rebalanced, quietly, elegantly, without scandal. Because that was her gift, undoing people without leaving fingerprints. The Boston facility stood atop a wooded hill, designed more like a retreat than a hospital. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked pine trees. The scent of antiseptic mingled with fresh lavender. A private medical team attended to no more than a dozen patients at any given time. Marcus Morgan was their youngest, and, increasingly, their most promising. The treatment had begun cautiously, low-dose therapies, strict monitoring, but 3 weeks in, his vitals had stabilized. His energy returned. The color in his face had shifted from gray to a subtle glow. He'd started sketching again. His doctors called it a miracle in progress. Ruby called it the only reason she could endure her bed rest without falling apart. Dominic arranged the visit without telling her. She found out only when the nurse wheeled her into the living room and saw him reviewing security logistics on his phone. "You're going to Boston?" she asked, startled. He looked up. "Yes. You didn't think to mention it? I didn't want to raise your heart rate." She frowned. "I'm not a patient. I'm his sister." "You're both," he said evenly. "And I'm not going in your place. I'm going because I want to see the person you gave up your life for." The plane touched down in Boston just before noon. Dominic arrived at the facility in a black coat, flanked by 2 assistants and a folder full of Marcus's updated records. But once inside, he dismissed them all. Marcus was sketching in the courtyard when Dominic approached. Their first exchange was quiet, curious. Marcus set down his pencil and studied him with the skepticism of someone who'd been burned too many times. "So, you're the billionaire." Dominic nodded. "And you're the reason Ruby hasn't run away." Marcus smirked. "She could if she wanted to. I believe that." They sat in silence for a while. Marcus broke it. "You know, you don't look like the type of guy to marry someone like her." Dominic turned slightly. "Neither do you look like the kind of patient who almost died twice this year." "Touché." They both chuckled. A small crack in the frost. "She used to draw superheroes when we were kids," Marcus said, tapping the sketch pad. "All of them looked like our dad. Then after he died, they all started looking like her." Dominic looked out at the trees. "And now?" Marcus flipped the pad. A new sketch. 4 small, indistinct forms beside a woman with long hair seated beneath a tree. "She doesn't draw anymore," Marcus said, "but she's still trying to save people." Dominic studied the page. "She's already saved me." The words escaped before he could bury them. Marcus caught it. "Do you love her?" Dominic didn't answer, which, in Marcus's eyes, said everything. Back in New York, Ruby waited for updates like clockwork. Her phone never left her side. When it finally buzzed, she swiped before the second vibration. A photo arrived. Marcus, grinning, really grinning, sitting beside Dominic on a bench, both holding coffee. Their heads leaned slightly toward one another. The angle was natural, candid. She stared at the image until her eyes blurred, her past and present, side by side. That night, Dominic returned to the mansion after midnight. Ruby was awake, propped up by pillows. "You went," she said. He nodded. She gestured to the photo on her screen. He smiled. "Like he used to." Dominic poured water from the bedside pitcher and handed her the glass. "He likes black coffee with too much sugar," she laughed. "He always has." They sat together, the room dim, the quiet full. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For going? For not making it feel like business?" Dominic looked down. "I didn't expect to like him. He's the best part of me." Dominic's voice lowered. "And you're becoming the best part of me." She stilled. Their eyes met. And in that moment, nothing was written in ink or sealed by lawyers, just something slowly, undeniably unfolding. The top floor of the mansion had been closed off for years, unused, untouched, preserved like a forgotten attic in a castle made of stone and silence. Dominic opened it one morning without ceremony. "You should see this," he said. Ruby followed, her steps slow but determined, her balance cautious under the watchful eye of her nurse. The elevator brought them to a long, quiet corridor lined with skylights. At the end stood double doors. He pushed them open. Inside was a wide, empty room with curved windows and soft light that spilled across bare floors. The ceiling arched in a perfect dome. The walls had once been pale yellow. Time had faded them into something softer, worn. "This was my mother's idea of a nursery," Dominic said. "She had it designed when she was pregnant the second time." Ruby turned toward him. "Your sibling?" "She miscarried," he replied. "Twins. She never came up here again." There was no emotion in his voice, just memory. Ruby stepped to the center of the room. "Why now?" "Because you're carrying 4. She looked at him. His meaning landed gently but clearly. He was giving her the space to create something new. She smiled. "Can I design it?" He didn't hesitate. "Whatever you want." Over the next 2 weeks, plans formed. Paint samples, fabric swatches, crib styles, wall murals. Ruby worked from her bed, sketching layouts in watercolor. Warm tones, playful stars, a ceiling painted like a dusk sky. She requested natural light, hardwood floors softened with plush rugs, a reading corner, and 4 identical bassinets with space between them, so they don't grow up always competing for the same square foot. Dominic sat with her through it all, sometimes offering opinions, sometimes just listening, but always present. One evening, she was sitting upright in the nursery space, a blanket around her shoulders, tracing the outline of her mural with a pencil. She paused suddenly, placing a hand to her belly. Movement, sharp, rhythmic, a flutter, then another. she gasped. Dominic looked up from the armchair. "Are you all right?" She took his hand without asking and pressed it to the curve of her stomach. A tiny kick met his palm, then another. His eyes widened. For a moment he didn't speak, just stared at the place where 4 lives moved beneath his hand. He whispered, "They're real." Ruby smiled. Very. His fingers didn't move. He stayed still, like if he breathed too hard the moment would vanish. Then, softly, he looked at her. "Does it scare you?" She nodded. "Every minute, and still you smile." "I have to," she said. "They deserve a world that starts with joy, not fear." Their eyes locked. Time slowed. Dominic leaned in, closer, the way people do when words fall short. For the first time, his guard dropped completely, and then her phone buzzed. A sharp vibration against the hardwood floor. They both froze. She pulled back. Reality returned. Dominic stepped away, retrieving the phone and handing it to her without a word. It was a message from Keller. Urgent call from Tokyo office. Board matter. Dominic exhaled. "I have to take this, I know," she said. He paused. "We'll finish this tomorrow." She nodded. "I'd like that." He turned, paused once at the door, then left, leaving behind soft shadows and the ghosts of something unfinished. It began with a dull pressure low in Ruby's abdomen. Not pain, not sharp, just wrong. She mentioned it to the nurse, routine, casual. But when the monitors were connected and the numbers began to shift, casual vanished. The nurse's face changed first, then her voice. "I'm calling Dr. Calvert." Within 10 minutes, 2 more medical staff arrived. The room filled with the soft panic of controlled urgency. Machines beeped. A tablet lit up with live vitals. One nurse kept Ruby calm, while another whispered into her earpiece. Ruby tried to sit up. "Someone tell me what's going on." "Let's keep you still for now," one said. Dr. Calvert arrived moments later. He didn't smile. He never did when things were serious. Ruby's breath caught. "It's too early." "Exactly. You're only 27 weeks. We have to stop progression." He turned to the nurse. "Magnesium sulfate, low dose. Prep for steroid injection. Order fetal echocardiograms now." The room turned clinical. Ruby tried to breathe, tried to steady herself, but the air was too thin. She reached for her phone. Dominic arrived 15 minutes later. He didn't speak as he entered, just took in the scene, Ruby pale and trembling, IVs in both arms, nurses moving in shifts, Calvert at the foot of the bed, barking instructions into a headset. "Talk to me," Dominic said. Calvert met his gaze. "She's in preterm labor. Mild but unstable. If we act now, we can stop it. But we need full bed rest. No stress. No movement. 24-hour monitoring." Ruby looked at Dominic, eyes wide. "I didn't do anything wrong." His voice cracked. "I know." He stepped to her side and took her hand, and didn't let go. Hours passed. The contractions slowed. The Medicat ion worked, but the fear didn't. Ruby lay still in her upgraded bed, IV humming beside her, fetal monitors rhythmically beeping through the night. Dominic stayed, not in the chair, not in the hallway. But beside her, his sleeves rolled up, his phone off, his silence protective. He watched her sleep, watched the rise and fall of her chest, watched the blip of 4 tiny heartbeats on the monitor, proof that life, even fragile, was still fighting. He had built empires, broken records, outmaneuvered boardrooms and legal traps. But nothing had ever felt as helpless as watching the woman who had agreed to carry his future now fighting to keep it alive. At 3:42 a.m., Ruby stirred. "You're still here," she whispered. "I'm not leaving." She turned her head. "You said that before. I didn't believe you." His jaw tightened. "I mean it now." "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. Then, softly, "Because I can't watch you disappear." She blinked slowly, eyes wet. "I thought I was just a contract." "You're not." The monitor beeped steadily beside them. 4 lives, still with them. Ruby whispered, "I'm scared." Dominic leaned closer. "So am I." And just like that, the space between them disappeared. Not with a kiss, but with truth. By morning, Dr. Calvert returned. "The Medicat ion is holding," he said. "But from this moment forward, complete bed rest. No standing, no sitting for long periods. Every decision from now on is about protecting them." Ruby nodded, exhausted but alert. Dominic stood beside her. Calvert glanced between them. "And I assume Mr. Rousseau will be adhering to the same commitment?" Dominic didn't hesitate. "I'm not leaving her side." "Good," the doctor said, "because she'll need more than medicine now. She'll need peace." Rooms were rearranged again. Dominic's office was moved into Ruby's suite. Security was doubled. Staff rotated around her, but with less noise, more warmth. A second nurse was stationed in a room next door. An emergency plan was written and rehearsed. But the biggest change was this. Dominic never left. He slept on the couch, worked from the armchair, played soft piano music, read headlines aloud with just enough sarcasm to make her smile. He didn't fix her, he stayed with her. And for Ruby, that was enough. The days blurred into one another. Sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains. Nurses moved with practiced silence, and the steady rhythm of monitors became the soundtrack of Ruby's life. She lay still. She obeyed every order. And yet, beneath her quiet compliance, emotions churned. It wasn't the fear of loss that kept her up at night. It was the weight of what she'd already given, and how little of herself she seemed to have left. Dominic never said the words, but he was always there. He'd begun shaving in her bathroom, taking calls only on the balcony so as not to wake her, reading the news beside her, commenting dryly on stories she barely followed anymore. But it wasn't until the 7th night, when the rain started tapping against the glass, that the silence between them finally cracked. She woke from a dream of fire and screaming. Her heart pounded, her hands shook. Dominic stirred immediately from the couch. "Ruby?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the ceiling, wide and unblinking. He crossed to her side. "What is it?" "I was 7, she whispered. "When the fire happened," Dominic said nothing. "My mom died trying to pull my dad out. And my dad, he was already gone. I dragged Marcus through the back door. His hair was singed. I thought I'd lost him too." Tears welled in her eyes. "I promised I'd never let anything happen to him again. And now, what if I can't keep them safe? What if I fail all of them?" Dominic knelt beside the bed. "You won't," he said quietly. "You can't know that." "No," he admitted. "But I can sit here and believe it for you when you forget how to—" Ruby covered her face. "I didn't sign up to feel this much," she choked. "And I didn't expect you to become the only person who makes me feel anything at all," he said. She looked at him, startled. He didn't flinch. "My father died screaming in a locked room," Dominic said. "Not from illness. From a stroke, yes, but also from rage. He blamed everyone, including me, for not being the son he wanted. For not saving a company that was never really mine to begin with." He swallowed hard. "I spent the next 10 years becoming someone he couldn't ignore, even in death, and the price was everything human about me." Ruby's fingers curled into the blanket. "And now?" she asked. He looked at her, exhausted, exposed, and more honest than he'd ever allowed himself to be. "Now," he said, "I want to remember what it feels like to care without it costing me everything." She reached out and took his hand, warm, alive, real. Later, as the rain softened into mist outside, they sat in the quiet, no longer protector and protected, no longer contract holders, but two people who had both survived the fire of their pasts, and now, against all odds, were learning how to build something from the ashes. Genevieve Russo waited until Dominic left the mansion for his quarterly board meeting. She always struck when the house was quiet. The timing had to be perfect, just enough space between calm and chaos to ensure her words would land where they were meant to, in Ruby's mind, unchallenged and unchecked. Dr. Preston had delivered the forged documents the night before, meticulously crafted files suggesting Dominic's legal team was preparing postnatal custody transfer papers. A fabricated memo, annotated with Dominic's initials, discussed full parental rights and severance payout upon live birth, all fake, all convincing. Genevieve had overseen every detail. Now came the theater. She entered Ruby's suite with a subtle knock. The nurse looked up from her tablet but didn't protest. Genevieve held a bouquet of white peonies in one hand and a leather folder in the other. "A gift," she said sweetly, "and some clarity." Ruby, propped in bed, accepted the flowers with suspicion. "You don't usually bring gifts." Genevieve sat in the armchair beside her. "No, but I do bring truth, even when it's inconvenient." She opened the folder. Out slid the documents, highlighted paragraphs, signatures, legal jargon dense enough to silence anyone not trained to decode it. "What is this?" Ruby asked. "Your future," Genevieve replied. "After the babies arrive," Ruby flipped through the papers. Her eyes froze on the words: termination of spousal agreement, sole custody transfer, medical custody rights, non-disclosure enforcement. Her chest tightened. Genevieve continued, voice calm, precise. "Dominic isn't the type to leave loose ends. You were always a temporary solution. He needed heirs. You were vetted, acquired, and soon, you'll be released." Ruby stared at the final page. A payout figure, 8 figures, cold and impersonal. "I don't believe you," she whispered. "You don't have to," Genevieve said, rising. "But I thought, as their mother, you deserve to know before they're taken from you." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "You're not the first woman Dominic's discarded, just the first to carry his name." Then she left. Alone, Ruby sat in silence. The room began to tilt. She reread the documents, twice. Her pulse rose, her breath shortened. She remembered how Dominic had canceled meetings, how he'd stayed at her side, but she also remembered the contract, the terms, the timeline. It had all been so clean, too clean. Was this what he was protecting her from? Or guiding her toward? Had everything meant nothing? Her hand slipped to her belly, the baby's kicked, restless under the weight of her spiraling thoughts. And for the first time in weeks, she felt alone. The folder stayed on Ruby's lap long after Genevieve was gone. Her fingers trembled each time she turned a page, but she couldn't stop reading. The more she looked, the more convincing the lies became. The terms felt familiar, language Dominic's lawyers had used in early drafts of their agreement. It didn't matter that some details were off. In her state, nothing felt trustworthy. Not the silence in the hall, not the nurse avoiding eye contact, not even the memory of Dominic's hand on hers. By dusk, Ruby made a decision. She wasn't going to wait and be discarded. She was going to leave, on her own terms. Vivian answered on the second ring. "Ruby, it's late. Are you okay?" "No," Ruby whispered. "I need your help." There was silence on the line, then urgency. "Where are you?" "I'm still at the mansion, but I have to leave tonight." "Ruby, I don't have time to explain. Please, just help me." Vivian didn't hesitate. "Text me the address. I'll find a way to get you out." The escape plan wasn't elaborate. Vivian would arrive posing as a personal assistant. Clipboard, calm, confidence. She'd slip Ruby out through the lower garage exit, bypassing the east side cameras. Dominic wouldn't return until late. It had to be now. Ruby changed slowly. Every motion was deliberate, painful. She pulled on a loose black dress, flat shoes, wrapped her medical monitor cords in a scarf. Her breath shortened halfway through, but she kept moving. She stuffed a few sketches into her satchel, along with her prenatal journal and the photograph of Marcus. Then she sat, waited, prayed. Vivian arrived at 8:13 p.m., sharp. She walked through the front gates like she belonged there. The butler nodded. She offered a smile. "Document retrieval for Mrs. Russo." Ruby met her in the service hallway. One look at her face and Vivian knew. "You shouldn't be walking," she whispered. "I don't care," Ruby said, her voice raw. "I'm not letting them take them from me." She took Ruby's arm, steadying her. They moved quickly through the back corridor, down the staff elevator, toward the garage, almost free, until Ruby's knees buckled. The pain was sharp and sudden, not a cramp, a tearing. She gasped, grabbing the railing. "Ruby!" Vivian's voice cracked. Ruby didn't answer. A rush of heat spilled down her legs. Her dress darkened, fluid, blood. Vivian screamed. Staff heard it within seconds. Then the alarm sounded. Everything blurred, flashing lights, oxygen mask. Ruby drifted in and out, faces over her, voices in static. 4 fetal heartbeats. "She's dilated. We have to move now." Dominic was halfway through a board presentation when the call came. He didn't let the assistant finish the sentence. He was in the car in 3 minutes, barking into the phone, demanding a helicopter. By the time he reached the private hospital, they were already prepping for emergency surgery. He saw her through the glass, pale, motionless, hooked to more wires than he could count. A nurse placed a hand on his arm. "We need you to sign the consent form." He looked at the clipboard. Words blurred, then reappeared. High-risk cesarean, maternal hemorrhage, neonatal ICU, premature viability. He signed, then sat outside her room with his head in his hands, hearing only the sound of his heart trying not to break. Dominic had faced countless crises, stock market crashes, hostile takeovers, whispered betrayals in boardrooms. But none of it had ever made his hands shake. None of it had ever made him pray. Until now. He sat outside the emergency operating suite, elbows on his knees, head bowed, phone dark in his pocket. The white walls around him pulsed with sterile stillness. A pair of NICU nurses passed quietly with incubators prepped for premature delivery. 4. There were 4 babies, and the woman carrying them was bleeding. Fighting, alone, because of him. He had replayed it a dozen times already. Why hadn't anyone stopped her? Why hadn't he been there? The questions echoed louder than the sound of the ventilator behind the wall. Noah arrived within the hour. His face said everything. "Talk to me," Dominic said. "She's in surgery," Noah answered. "Placental abruption. The babies are viable, but early, very early." Dominic stood, pacing. "And Ruby?" Noah's voice lowered. "She's critical. Blood pressure's crashing. We're doing everything we can." Dominic leaned against the glass, fists clenched. "She didn't tell me she was scared. She didn't know how," Noah said. "You're not easy to reach." Dominic didn't move. "You need to prepare yourself," Noah added. "There's a chance she might not know." The word sliced through the hallway like a blade. "She's not going to die," Dominic said. Noah said nothing. Dominic turned slowly, eyes red. "If she dies, everything dies." Inside the operating room, Ruby's heartbeat faltered once. Then again, the surgeons worked with calm panic. Blood was transfused. The first baby was delivered, then the second. Tiny cries, weak but present. The third, and then silence. The fourth struggled. A nurse whispered a prayer, but Ruby still wasn't stable. 2 hours later, the doctor stepped into the hallway. Dominic stood. "We got them out," he said. "All 4 are in neonatal care. Breathing, monitored." Dominic's voice cracked. "And Ruby, she's alive." The words nearly brought him to his knees. "But we almost lost her," the doctor continued. "She needs rest, time, and no more shocks." Dominic nodded slowly, then whispered, "I won't leave her again." He entered her recovery room quietly. She looked impossibly small against the white sheets, her face pale, lips dry. Machines beeped around her like cautious reassurances. He sat beside her, took her hand, and whispered, "I'm sorry." He didn't know if she could hear him. Didn't care. He needed her to know, and I almost did. In the nursery wing, 4 premature infants lay in warm, glowing beds, monitored by machines, cared for by hands trained for fragility. Life had arrived, but it had come through fire. Dr. Noah Brooks wasn't one to make accusations without evidence, but he was also a man who'd known Dominic Russo since they were children, long enough to see the changes. And what he saw now, in the ICU recovery wing, was a man broken open by love he hadn't realized he was capable of. Ruby's condition was stabilizing. The babies, fragile, fighting, were holding on. But something still gnawed at Noah's instincts. Her sudden deterioration, the timing of her attempted escape, the bleeding. It didn't track with what her charts had predicted. He requested access to the medication logs. He reviewed every line. Something stood out, a hormone supplement Ruby had been taken off weeks prior, now mysteriously reintroduced in her morning pills. Noah knew Ruby never questioned her prescriptions, and the switch had been logged under a shadow profile, consulted by Dr. Preston. He double-checked the timing. The dosage was off, and it had started 2 days before her collapse. Preston looked up, startled. "Dr. Brooks," Noah threw the printout on the desk. "Explain this." Preston glanced down, his throat moved. "I was instructed." "By who?" Preston's silence answered for him. Noah stepped forward. "You altered her medication during a high-risk pregnancy. You risked 5 lives. You could have killed her." "It wasn't meant to go that far," Preston said, voice breaking. "It was supposed to just shake her confidence, raise concern, push her into early delivery, nothing critical. And then what? She walks out, and Dominic claims the children?" Preston looked away. "You don't understand Genevieve. She said it was about protecting the family name, controlling the outcome." Noah stared. "You poisoned a woman for legacy." Preston buried his face in his hands. "I didn't think it would escalate. It always escalates." Dominic stood at the foot of Ruby's bed, watching her breathe. She was pale but stable. The rise and fall of her chest a reassurance he checked every 2 minutes. He hadn't moved from the room in over 30 hours. The door opened. Noah entered. Dominic turned. "You need to hear this," Noah said. He closed the door, lowered his voice, explained everything. Preston, the tampered pills, Genevieve's scheme, the fake documents planted to shatter Ruby's trust. Dominic listened in silence. When Noah was done, Dominic's jaw clenched. "Can you prove it?" "I already have," Noah said. "Preston signed a formal admission. It's on record." Dominic turned back to Ruby, voice hoarse. "She thought I betrayed her. She thought she had no choice." Dominic nodded, not with anger, but with something deeper. Resolve. As Noah left the room, Dominic sat again beside Ruby's bed. His hand found hers, and this time he spoke not in apology, but in truth. "I don't know when it happened," he whispered. "But you became the one thing I never planned for, and the only thing I want to keep." She didn't stir, but her fingers curled slightly around his. And that was enough, for now. Dominic had summoned her himself. No pretext, no ceremony, just a message, come, alone. She entered the private library expecting business talk, perhaps a strategy adjustment or a veiled warning. What she found was Dominic standing behind his father's old desk, the very desk Genevieve had once helped choose, back when influence was something she wore like perfume. On the desk was a folder, and beside it, Noah Brooks. She froze. "You brought the doctor into this?" Dominic's voice was flat. "Sit down." Genevieve did not sit. She crossed her arms. "If this is about Ruby's condition, this is about attempted medical interference, forged legal documents, and your involvement in an act that nearly killed 5 people. Her face didn't change. "You're accusing your stepmother of murder now?" "I'm stating facts," he said. "Noah has a sworn confession from Preston. He documented everything, dates, prescriptions, conversations." He pushed the folder toward her. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. "You know what surprises me most," Dominic said. "That you thought I'd let it happen. That I'd stand by while you destroyed her." "She was destroying you," Genevieve snapped. "You don't even see it. You were becoming soft, distracted. This empire, our legacy, was slipping." Dominic stepped out from behind the desk. "I wasn't slipping. he said. I was finally breathing. Genevieve's expression twisted. She used you, played the victim, manipulated your guilt. No, Dominic said coldly. That was you. The words hung in the air like frost. Genevieve's voice cracked slightly. I built this life with your father. I carried his shame, his name, and all the secrets no one else dared hold. And now, you toss me out for a girl who doesn't belong here? Dominic stepped closer. She belongs more than you ever did. A pause. Then Genevieve laughed. A bitter, quiet thing. So this is it? You disown me? Her smile vanished. You have until the end of the day to vacate the Russo properties, Dominic added. Your security clearances are already revoked. Genevieve's voice shook. Dominic, you stopped being family the moment you tried to take mine away. She stared at him, then turned and walked out, for the first time without control. Back at the hospital, Ruby remained asleep, her vitals steady but slow. Dominic returned that night. He didn't say a word when he entered her room. Just sat down, held her hand, and whispered softly, no more lies, no more ghosts, just us. When you're ready. It was dawn when Ruby finally woke. The lights were low, the machines steady. The room smelled like antiseptic and lavender. Her mouth was dry, her muscles ached, but the pain was distant, dulled by the slow trickle of Medicat ion and the weight of exhaustion. She turned her head. Dominic was there, slumped forward in the visitor's chair, chin resting against his chest, fingers still wrapped loosely around hers. He hadn't moved in hours. Her voice came out as a whisper. Dominic. His eyes opened instantly, not with panic but with relief so deep it softened every hard line in his face. You're awake, he breathed. She tried to sit up, winced. He was on his feet in a second, pressing the nurse call button, adjusting her pillows, speaking softly. When she was settled, he sat again, closer this time. She studied him. His eyes were red, his jaw unshaven, his shirt wrinkled and stained from worry. He looked like a man who'd been living at the edge of grief. What happened? She asked. You tried to leave, he said gently. And your body gave out. Her eyes watered. The babies? They're here, early, small, but alive. Her hand flew to her belly. He covered it with his. They're being monitored around the clock. They're fighters, just like their mother. Her lips trembled. I thought you were going to take them from me. His gaze didn't shift. I know, he said. She turned away, ashamed. Genevieve showed me documents. I thought they were real. They were forged. And I didn't know about them until after you collapsed. He told her everything. About Preston, about the pills, about Genevieve's expulsion from the company, and his life. When he finished, Ruby lay still, her face unreadable. You should have told me sooner. I should have told you everything, he agreed. Silence stretched between them. Finally, she asked, Why did you stay? Because I love you. The words were quiet, unrushed, but they landed like thunder. Ruby turned toward him. His voice cracked. I didn't know it until I almost lost you, but it's the only thing I know for certain now. Tears slipped from her eyes. I don't know if I can trust you, she whispered. You don't have to. Not yet. Not fully. But I'll earn it, Ruby. Every day. She closed her eyes. Inhaled. Exhaled. I don't know if I'm ready. Then we'll take it slow, he said. One breath, one heartbeat, one bottle at a time. She opened her eyes, and for the first time since the pain, since the fear, since the lies, she nodded. That evening, a nurse wheeled Ruby into the neonatal wing. Dominic walked beside her. Together, they stood in front of 4 tiny incubators, each one housing a flicker of life that had defied every odd. Ruby reached through the opening in one of the chambers, touched her daughter's hand. She's warm, she whispered, arms not touching, but near, watching the life they'd created, fragile, imperfect, and full of possibility. The early morning quiet was broken by a single gasp. Ruby shifted in her hospital bed, her breath catching sharply as the pain struck, low, deep, and unmistakable. It wasn't pressure. It was labor. 34 weeks. Too soon, but far enough. The nurse was in the room within seconds. Monitors flickered to life. Ruby gripped the bed rails, sweat beading on her forehead. Contractions are strong and regular, the nurse said. Let's page Dr. Calvert. Dominic, asleep in the chair beside her, jolted awake as if his body had sensed her pain before his mind did. She looked at him, eyes wide. It's happening, she whispered. He was at her side instantly. I'm here. Within 20 minutes, the surgical suite was prepped. 4 neonatal teams were assembled. Incubators rolled into place. The hospital moved like a machine, precise, fast, focused. Ruby was wheeled down the hall, her hand locked in Dominic's. She's stable, Calvert said as they entered the OR. But the babies will come fast. Everyone ready? Dominic was given scrubs. Ruby was placed under anesthesia. A spinal block, carefully administered. The lights above her blurred. The world slowed. Then everything began. The first cry was sharp and small, a girl. Ruby heard it through the haze and let the sound wrap around her like a lifeline. Then came the second, another girl, weaker but breathing. The third, this time a boy. And finally the fourth, delivered in silence at first. Ruby held her breath. So did everyone else. Then, a soft wail. Dominic exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. The surgeons smiled beneath his mask. All four. Alive. In the quiet that followed, Ruby lay still, her body spent, her mind barely catching up. Then she felt his hand. Dominic's. He knelt beside her, cradling the smallest infant, wrapped in a soft blue blanket. "Look," he said, voice shaking. "Look what we made." Tears slipped down his cheeks, real tears, not from fear, from love. The nurse brought the others, bundled in pinks and whites and pale blues. Ruby could barely hold all four with her eyes, but they were there. Each a flicker of life that had once seemed impossible. Dominic touched their tiny heads with trembling fingers. His voice was hoarse. "I didn't think I could feel like this." Ruby turned to him. "What do you feel?" "Everything," he whispered. That night in the private recovery suite, Ruby awoke to find Dominic standing beside the bassinets. He wasn't speaking, just watching, as if memorizing every breath, every twitch, every miracle. And for the first time since their story began, he wasn't a billionaire or a strategist or a man scarred by legacy. He was a father, and she was the woman who had given him that name. The house no longer echoed. It pulsed, with cries, coos, warm bottles, the shuffle of soft slippers, and the rustle of midnight blankets. Every corner held signs of life, pastel swaddles, half-folded onesies, lullaby speakers, sterilized bottle racks. The mansion was no longer a fortress. It was a home. The Quadruplets returned from neonatal care after 6 long weeks, small but strong. Ruby wept when she walked through the nursery holding 2 at once, her chest aching with both joy and disbelief. Dominic was quiet that day. He held the tiniest boy like porcelain, pacing slowly, murmuring something too soft to hear. At first, Ruby thought it was nerves. Then she realized he was singing, off-key, barely audible, but real. The nights were chaos, 2-hour feedings, burp cloths in every room, alarms for vitamins, weight checks, diaper logs. Dominic, for all his perfectionist habits, adjusted like a man learning a new language he already loved. He was always first to rise, always last to sleep. He cradled babies with one hand and read stock reports with the other, took calls with burping towels over his shoulder, memorized which cry belonged to which child, built a spreadsheet to track sleeping rotations, replaced the marble-topped coffee table with a padded playmat. No one told him to. He just did it. Ruby watched from the sofa one afternoon, exhausted, healing, her body still tender from the cesarean. Dominic was lying on the floor, 2 babies sprawled across his chest, one asleep on his shoulder, the other chewing his thumb. He looked up, saw her watching, and smiled. Not a performance, not a deflection, just a man at peace with everything messy, loud, and beautiful about life. Her throat tightened. He didn't have to say it. He loved them, all of them. Marcus arrived a week later, fully recovered, steadier, older somehow. Ruby laughed until she cried. He held the littlest girl with practiced calm and looked up at his sister. "You did it." "No," she said, eyes on Dominic across the room. "We did. They weren't perfect. There were still silences, still pieces unspoken. But the air was different. No longer measured, no longer contractual. This was a beginning, and it was theirs. 6 months passed. Seasons shifted. The city bloomed into spring. The mansion softened with sunlight and laughter. Life no longer waited. It spilled forward day by day, bottle by bottle, heartbeat by heartbeat. The Quadruplets were thriving, no longer swaddled, but wriggling, gurgling, beginning to recognize faces, respond to music, stretch their limbs in 4 directions like sunflowers trying to reach their place in the world. Ruby had healed, scars fading, strength returning. But something else had grown too. Trust, slow, earned, gentle. Dominic never asked for it. He simply showed up, again and again, until she gave it freely. He asked her to meet him in the garden, late afternoon. No rush, just them. Ruby wore a pale blue dress she hadn't touched since before the babies. Her hair was loose, her hands freckled from long days under nursery lamps. He was waiting under the wisteria pergola, where lilacs swayed in the breeze. The air smelled like June and memory. She smiled. "You said it wasn't urgent." "It's not," he said, stepping forward. "It's overdue." She looked down, at the velvet box in his hand, then back up. He opened it. Inside was a ring, simple, no flash. A platinum band with a single stone the color of sea glass. 6 months ago, he said quietly, we said vows written by lawyers, signed them, followed them. She nodded, remembering. But none of that matters now. He stepped closer. This time, I'm asking you to say yes, without contracts, without obligation. Just because you want to. Her eyes welled. I want to, she whispered. But not for the children, he said. No, she replied. For me. He slipped the ring on her finger, and then, no priest, no judge, no cameras. He kissed her, not as a partner in business, not as a father to her children, but as the man who had learned to love her when she was broken, and she kissed him back as the woman who had survived, and built something new. Later that evening, the babies slept. Marcus cooked dinner, Vivian sent flowers, and Ruby stood on the balcony, hand resting on her chest, watching Dominic bounce their son in his arms beneath the stars. They had rewritten the ending, no longer bound by what had brought them together, but by what kept them here. Love on purpose. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Ruby and Dominic's journey began with a contract, but it ended with something far more powerful. Choice. Love that wasn't demanded, but discovered. Trust that wasn't given, but earned. A family built not on perfection, but on perseverance. If their story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who believes in second chances, or maybe someone who needs to. We'd love to hear your thoughts, your favorite moment, the scene that made you cry, or even the line you'll carry with you. Drop it in the comments below. Let's talk about it. Let's heal together. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel, because here we tell stories that remind us love is never neat, never easy, but always worth fighting for. Like if you believe in redemption, share if you believe love can grow from the most unexpected beginnings. And remember, every heartbeat tells a story. This was Ruby and Dominic's. Yours may be next.